Hi, Byron.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing all right. It's been a day.
It's been a day already.
Hello, hello. Hi, Byron. I'm Jody.
Jody, how you doing?
Good. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. Doing good.
You're a busy man.
Thank
Yeah, a
you
little
for
busy.
joining us today.
Of course. No, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. So, how has it been with the pandemic? How have you been? How's your family been? How's it been going?
Family's good. You know, everybody's just I don't know, we're a typical family, so everybody's, we don't have anybody with like underlying health issues, so it's made it easier to manage. And I think that's kind of the way, I've always been trying to advocate for people to deal with it. Is you have to really first take stock of your family and your friends and your associates.
Right.
My mom, she's in Brooklyn. She has not left her house in Brooklyn.
Aw.
Wow.
But again, she's 69, and
Yeah.
so she wants to protect her health. Meanwhile, I'm 41 and I'm in good health, and so you have to. I think everybody's got to make a decision for themselves, but also
Right.
taking it seriously. You don't want to mess around. But
That's for sure.
Yeah.
That is for sure.
So, what's your
My mom's
thoughts?
93, so she's but she's pretty brazen. She just puts on a mask and gets out there. But Brooklyn, I know, had been hit pretty hard, I think, at one point, hadn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's also a part of kind of how is your city or town set up.
Right.
Right.
If I was living in New York, I wouldn't be doing half the things I do.
Yeah.
Mostly because it's so easy to transmit anything in New York because people are really kind of in close quarters.
Mhm.
If you live in a rural area, probably didn't really change your life much at all because you're already accustomed to not being in close contact with a lot of people anyway. So
True.
It doesn't
Very
matter.
true. Very true.
So, what's your thoughts on COVID? Like, since Florida is open now, what are your thoughts on that? All the restrictions have been lifted.
I think that obviously, especially back in March, we didn't really know what to expect. Like, actually, we were finishing up legislative session back in early March. I was actually in Washington at the APAC conference, the same time the CPAC conference was going on. So it was that weekend I was in DC. And, there were 5 of my colleagues that were in DC at different conferences. So, I was one of the 5 that there was like an emergency quarantine when the word came out that somebody at CPAC had tested positive, and actually also at APAC. I think it was 2 people at CPAC and 3 people at APAC tested positive. And so, we didn't know what was going on. So, myself and we were actually literally pulled off the floor and put in a medical quarantine off in a conference room in the speaker's suite while they disinfected the entire chamber. And so, yeah. And then, so at that point, they pulled us out a couple hours later and like, well, what are your symptoms? What's this? What's that? They were trying to get information from the CDC at the time. And, then they kind of released us and let us go. And so, but this was back in March. We didn't really know anything. Now we know so much more. It's very clear that, the tests are readily available to get. Antibody tests are now available. It's much better. It's easier to manage. So as we lift restrictions down here, it's because, you have to get back to work. I mean, we can't be in a consistent lockdown period simply because, lives still go on in spite of COVID-19. People still have to feed their families. Kids still have to get an education. We can't stop life because of an invisible enemy, especially when there's things that we can do to manage it. I think, even in light of the president's positive test last night, one of the key questions was, well, what's going to happen to the government? We still have to operate the government. I mean, we still have to live.
Right.
We still have to do things. And I think that's the president. I haven't spoken to him, but I think that's what his mindset is. And I think that's what everybody's mindset should be.
Yeah. If I could just piggyback on that question or that statement. Obviously, you support what Governor DeSantis has done. I'm just basing that on what you just said now. So you support his most recent decision to go to the next step and get Florida basically up and running. There were very mixed reviews regarding how the president handled the response to the virus. One, how did you think he did and is continuing to do so? And two, do you think he could have done anything more to aid in containing the virus?
In terms of what, the governor's decisions now to lift lockdowns, it's the right thing to do. Our positivity rates have been trending down since our spike in June. And again, you can't keep people locked down forever. The other thing you quickly realize is that no matter what the government says, and you actually go out and see people in your community, they've made their own decision already. People were going out, they were hanging out, they were doing their stuff. You just want people to do it safely, but people were getting back to life, to work and to life. And we were going to find a way to do it anyway. And I think that once the science is clear, you have to then release those restrictions. With respect to the president and the overall handling of the virus, I still think he's done a very good job. I mean, frankly, the only people who say he's done a terrible job are the people who are trying to defeat him for the presidency.
Right.
You can go back to what Andrew Cuomo and Gavin Newsom were saying in early April about how the president was very responsive, was helping them with everything that they needed, getting them equipment, constantly on the phone, making sure that he was of help. I think it was Governor Cuomo said the president's has been tremendous during this, and then of course the politics got involved, and then the tide changed. But I mean, look, it's very clear. I mean, even if you want to go back as far as the State of the Union, the president talked about COVID-19 in the State of the Union address back in January and making sure that we're prepared. Of course, everybody remembers that because Nancy Pelosi tore up his speech. It was frankly very disrespectful, but that's a whole other story.
So weird.
And then went out on the streets and told everybody to come to Chinatown.
Yeah, we forget that also happened in 2020.
Right.
Those things happened as well.
It feels so long ago, but you're right.
Yeah. I mean, everything from non-essential travel bans from China and from Europe, making sure that the manufacturing capacity in the United States was shifted to making sure we could make sure ventilators were readily available, making sure that hospital ships were sent to California and to New York, even though they weren't used, making sure that CDC was constantly putting out information every single day to state governments and local governments. I was on those calls. Personally, I've been on those calls, and really a coordination throughout the entire country. The president has done the job that, frankly, I think a competent leader does. Is anything perfect? No, nothing's perfect. We're having to get a lot of information on the fly. We're having to make sure that we are learning as much as we can, as quickly as we can. But I mean, as of this morning, I think it was about 208,000 deaths in the United States. And that's a tragedy for those families, don't get me wrong. But I always go back to what one of the original models that came out, it was more of hyperbole than anything else, but it called for 2.2 million lives lost.
It could be way more, yeah.
If we did nothing. And I think people forget that model was as if we do nothing, this is what's going to happen. Well, obviously, we haven't done that. I think you do have to commend the president for his quick action.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about you growing up. I know you grew up in Brooklyn with your mom. How was that transition from Brooklyn to Florida, and how has your childhood kind of molded who you are today?
Growing up in Brooklyn it was hard. We were poor, we struggled. My mother, to her credit though, she's a hard-nosed lady. She demands excellence in everything, and she demanded it of me. And so, when I was in elementary school, she pulled me out of public school, and she paid for my private school, out of her pocket, and she didn't have much. But she was working, and she was just like, you need a better education than what they could provide. And so she pulled me out, put me in a small Black private school in Flatbush, Brooklyn. And from there, that kind of started, you know, my education. And she kept me in private schools. And even in the times when she couldn't pay it, my grandmother stepped in and she paid my tuition. And so they both just realized that, you know, that I had, you know, a potential and they didn't want it to be squandered. And so that's what they did to fight for me. I left high school, you know, after graduation, you know, out of Nazareth High School, I went to Tallahassee, Florida. And so I actually enrolled in Florida A&M University, HBCU, in our country. And I was in their School of Business and Industry. Partied too much. I had too much fun. I'm honest about it.
I bet.
Florida will do that to you.
Tallahassee is fun.
Tallahassee is fun. I'm still a rattler at heart, you know.
Yeah.
So there was some great times at FAMU, and then I transferred to Florida State and finished my degrees in finance and marketing at Florida State. You know, I think, you know, my childhood, growing up in the inner city, you have to learn, you got to grow up quickly. You know, things aren't given to you. You got to really fight for everything that you get. You got to work hard and you understand it. And, you know, I think even, you know, people who grow up in inner cities, especially, you're accustomed to having a, you know, hustle. Like you gotta have that mindset where if you don't go get it, nobody's going to give it to you.
It's true.
I think that's one of the things that really helped shape me, who I am, and kind of how I move.
Okay, nice. And so, what inspired your finance and marketing direction? Like, what inspired you to major in that?
Oh, yeah, that's an easy one. So when I was in high school, there was an elective, and it was for investments. That's the one I took. So I was taking this elective, and we played a stock market game. And the teacher goes, okay, pick a stock and we're going to follow it. And that's going to be a part of your grade, but you have to demonstrate why you're picking the stock. So I picked Nike. Nike was my, so, you know, you got to imagine this is 1996. This is 96. The height of the Chicago Bulls run, everything was Michael Jordan. So I was like, this is easy. I'm going to win this game. I'm picking Nike. But I did, you know, I actually picked the best stock in the class. I hope my teacher doesn't come out later and say, no, I doesn't. But that's in my mind, I picked the best stock in the class. And, but it really, I just really liked the class. And so I was like, you know, I think I might go to college and study business, study finance. I think working in the stock market or whatever that means at the time is something I want to do.
Nice. Okay. And so I personally believe that, you know, financial literacy and building wealth within the Black community is going to be saving grace, to be honest. We'll have better access to healthcare, better education, better living conditions. Do you also feel that way? Like Black Americans need to be focused more on financial and economic empowerment other than social issues?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Without a question, without a doubt. Because I think, you know, one of the things that we've done in Florida, in the Florida legislature anyway, is, you know, trying to make sure that financial literacy is actually a part of high school graduation. Like you have to take it. You have to make sure you have it. And, you know, it's for Black Americans and really all Americans. You know, you'd be surprised how many people just don't have basic financial literacy skills. And unfortunately, they got to learn it once they've already been into debt, or they have to learn it after they've kind of already chosen a career they want to work in, and then come to the realization that that career or that pathway doesn't yield, frankly, the money to live the life that you want to live or choose to live. And so I think for Black Americans, that's critical for our development here in the United States. I mean, social issues, you can have your personal beliefs, and, you know, I have mine, there's no doubt about it. But if there's not a bedrock of a strong economic foundation, it's going to be very hard for you to be successful in America. You know, this is the land of merit and opportunity, but, you know, if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense. You know, you really have to, you know, make sure you have your business and your mind about you. So I fully support that.
Okay. And how did your career path kind of transition into Congress? Like, was that always a part of your plans, or did it just, was it like just all of a sudden? Like, how did that come about? And I know you're the chairman of the Finance and Banking Committee, or what is it?
Yeah.
And with
Insurance and banking in the
Insurance.
Florida House. Yeah. No, politics was never a part of the plan. I was apolitical. I mean, my family, we were all Democrats out of New York. We never talked about politics. I didn't care about politics. Even in my young adulthood, I didn't care about it. I never in my life thought I would ever be an elected official, let alone running for Congress. Never thought that. What happened was it was 2008 and we were in the middle of the financial collapse and I was working in insurance. And we had a couple of international clients who were, they were freaking out because they were trying to figure out what was going on in our economy. And so I actually was doing research for the owners of my company to be able to go back to our clients. And one of the things I did is I turned on the House Financial Services Committee this is 2008. I turned on the House Financial Services Committee and I was dumbfounded how members of Congress had no idea what they were talking about. Because here I am, at the time I was 29 years old. I've been in the working world for 6-7 years now. I knew more than a member of Congress about what was going on in the economy and in the banking system. And it frustrated me. I was really upset and frustrated by it. And so I just started looking at politics a little bit more and more. And then one of the things I started, one of the first books I ever read was The Law by Frederick Bastiat. And if you've never read it, the law is really a primer on what the purpose of law is supposed to be. It's not really about modern American politics. It's really about just what law is supposed to be and what its purpose. Bastiat was a French philosopher in 1850. He was there for the French Revolution. And so what he talked about was the issues they had in France is that you had elected officials, whatever, however you want to call them, who were subverting the law to favor one interest over another. And what happened was the French people revolted as a result of that constant misuse of law. And so, that's one of the key things that had me started thinking about politics. Because I didn't care about cable news. I never liked watching it. Sometimes I still don't like watching it, even today.
Yeah. So your transition into politics basically came from you noticing that there were people in Congress who didn't really know what they were talking about.
Like that was the start of it. And then, I've always been pretty curious as a person. And my mother always taught me, she would always tell me, like, don't listen to what people say, go find out for yourself.
Yeah.
And so that's always kind of been a part of my makeup is I'm gonna just go find out for myself instead of listening to what other people are saying. And so, what happened was I started reading on my own. And then a friend of mine who was big in politics was like, you got to listen to this guy named Mark Levin. Like, okay. So, I turned him on once and I'm like, man, who is this guy that just keeps yelling? Like, what's wrong with this guy? That was the first thing. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to sit down and I'm going to just listen to the guy. So I was like, I'm going to give him a month. I'll listen. And I just was listening to him for a month and I was like, man, this dude makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Then he started talking about, at the time, he was talking about, well, he still does today. He was talking about Locke and Montesquieu. So then I was like, okay, well, let me go find what they wrote. And I started reading about them. And then I started reading the Federalist Papers. And it just kept leading from one thing to the next.
Rabbit hole.
And so, I'm still a Democrat, but I'm reading all this stuff and I'm really, for the first time, starting to become more aware politically. And then I think it was 2010, I changed parties and, the rest is kind of history from there.
Nice.
That's
Okay.
great. All right.
Jody?
I have a question for you. Knowing that you are a supporter of a federal flat tax, could you explain for us how this works? Would it give us a sustainable GDP? And does this affect the balanced budget amendment?
A couple things. So I'm a supporter of the flat tax. I'm a supporter of the fair tax. Frankly, I'm a supporter of anything that's much simpler than what this is. I probably favor the fair tax more because I think consumption-based taxation is really the way we should be going. I think you earn your money, and after that, if whatever you decide to do in commerce is when you pay your taxes. That's how we do it in the state of Florida. We have a 6% sales tax that basically funds the state government. We don't have income taxes. I mean, there's property taxes, there's other fees and stuff you pay. But each fee comes with a direct purpose. It's not just taking in money for the sake of taking in money. You know, that's what the sales tax provides for. And so that's a major shift from tax policy today in the United States. I think a hybrid from that position is the flat tax. Flat tax is really just one rate. Some people call for 10%, some people call for 15%, but it's just one rate that everybody pays. You can actually do your income taxes on a postcard because there's no exemptions, there's no deductions.
Mhm.
That's the rate. You pay it, you move on. It actually simplifies the code. Now, I think the one thing that's important in another part of your question about GDP,
Mhm.
that tax policy, in my view, it can influence GDP and it can frankly destroy GDP. So if your tax policy is too draconian, it will destroy the economic growth in your economy because there's no incentive to go build the next unit, to sell the next home, to provide the next service if your money is just taken from you. And
Right.
so that's why when you hear these punitive ideas that come out of the left on tax policy, it's actually quite destructive uh,
Mhm.
to building wealth in the United States. You could take somebody like me. You know, I've been fairly successful, my wife and I. One of the most destructive things to a young couple or a young person trying to go up the income ladder is bracket creep. You start making more money, but you go into a new tax bracket.
A new
So
Right.
bracket.
when you're making the money, yeah, when you're making the money, you feeling good. You're like, okay, you know,
Mhm.
Then
I'm
more
doing
comes
my
out.
thing. I'm about to go do this, and then you go to sit down with your accountant. Your accountant says, "Oh no, but you now you owe this." And it's
Yeah.
like, well, hold on, like I just started making new money, and now you coming to me for more money. Like that thing is so destructive when you start really, you start really rising. And so that's why it's one of the reasons I'm a big supporter of the flat tax. I think in part of in growing our economy, it's part tax policy and it's part regulation. You know, if you put a lot of rules on people, it just makes them harder to be productive. And if you trap the amount of money they can actually take home, it doesn't incentivize them to be productive.
Mhm.
And I think that is, if instead of getting into this mess of paying your fair share and all this other nonsense that the left likes to talk about, we got to start talking about tax policy and how it affects the real world. And
Right.
that's the way I look at it. That's why I support those two measures.
That's great. Well, thank you. Another question I had was regarding environmental concerns. Your predecessor, Representative Francis Rooney, is big voice for Florida's environmental concerns. Going forward, do you plan to continue his efforts and support the policies and regulations regarding the environment that are in place? And also, would this continue on a local and state level? And then I have one other thing I just want to pop on there, but I'll let you go with that.
Um, I agree with some of the things Francis wants to do, not all. When it comes to water quality in Southwest Florida and really in South Florida, I completely agree with his stances. I think we need to fund the projects. I think phosphorus and nitrate and nitrogen levels are important. We got to try to find ways to keep those under control and get them further under control. One of the issues we are having in our area that most people don't talk about are septic tanks.
Mm,
And now you have a lot of septic tanks that leak into water bodies, which cause issues. And the other one is frankly it's starting to become more talked about is water treatment plants from municipalities that aren't keeping up with the growth in areas. And so, in Florida, one of the quiet things that is happening that's a real problem is if a municipality's water treatment plant is overloaded, they will release or raw sewage leaks into water bodies. That happens. It is a serious problem that we
it
got to
is.
make sure we get our arms around. Now, Francis also supports things like a carbon tax. I don't support that.
Okay.
I don't think that it is the job of the federal government to levy taxes or mandates to change behavior in industry. I don't think that's the role of government. I think it's something where industry and consumers together and what they're looking for, and what they choose to purchase, what they choose to develop. That's how systems innovate. I don't think government has a role in sticking its frankly hand in to try to shift things,
Mhm.
because going back to economics, that actually goes against Adam Smith's invisible hand. And if you ever read the writings of Adam Smith's theory of macroeconomics and economy is the thing that actually allows most people to be successful in life. You got to have a laissez-faire type of economic system if you want people to be able to rise from the bottom and to really do something with themselves. Because if you don't have that kind of economic system, then you're reliant on elected officials and people who are wealthy to put their hand, to tap you on the shoulder and say, okay, now it's your turn. No, we don't want that. I want people to be able to rise and fall on their own merit. So things like the carbon tax, I don't agree with that. I do support, renewable energy and green energy, but those things have to be developed. They have to be able to be adopted by people in their normal purchasing habits. And so, I think that, solar power, will that become more efficient and more attainable as time goes by? Yeah, probably. But if it doesn't, without government mandates, then that means it wasn't ready for prime time in the first place.
Right. Great. Well, that leads me right into my last question then. And we know you support the current ban on oil exploitation of the Gulf of Mexico. What is your stance then on the Green New Deal, and that has been advocated by the left?
Oh, the Green New Deal is a tragedy of epic proportions. That thing is a disaster waiting to happen. Because again, what it is a slew of mandates from politicians or prospective politicians who believe that if you follow their pathway, everything will be fixed. That's just not even life. I got 3 sons. If I mandate everything they do in their lives, they might accomplish what I want them to accomplish, but they won't accomplish it based upon their own decision making, and they won't be truly bought in. And that's the problem with these kind of plans. So I don't support the Green New Deal. I think it's ridiculous. I understand what they're trying to accomplish, but that's not the way to accomplish it. You cannot force your ideas on another person. You cannot force companies to bend to your will. Because when you do that, frankly, who ends up suffering are the poorest among us. They suffer every time. They don't have the ability to escape and say, well, you say whatever you want. People can make that decision for themselves. If you're a poor person in America, how does it help you when electricity prices increase? It does not. If you're a fledgling business or a smaller business and you're trying to get up to speed, how does it help you if you can't even keep the lights on consistently in your business? It does not. And so that's why I don't support those types of programs. And for the left, if they really want to embrace, a green technology or a technology that doesn't emit into the air, then we should be re-embracing nuclear power. Right. Nuclear power is not the old massive nuclear power plants we used to build in the United States. We can actually use modular nuclear reactors, the same ones that are on our nuclear subs, that power our nuclear subs, running all over the world. Yeah. We could be using that same technology to create micro reactors in a lot of our communities. And that way you can get consistent, sustainable, cheap energy that does not emit into the air. I support that. The technology exists. The problem is we have massive red tape at the federal level that prohibits it from being cost effective. Those are some of the things I think we should be doing.
That's great. Regarding cost effectiveness, in conversations that I have had with people that support the deal, the Green New Deal, I don't think they realize a lot of the time what it costs and what energy it takes to actually create what they are proposing, and the waste once these massive windmills and solar panels and things break for good, what that does to the earth itself. Did you have anything to address on that issue, or?
Oh yeah, they're clueless on that. I mean, look, here's the deal, right? So even in the presidential debate the other day, Joe Biden was, going on and on about, we'll redesign the entire governmental fleet to run on electric power. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, doesn't he realize that the vast majority of electricity in the country is still generated by fossil fuels? So even if you put every car in the government system on electricity, made them electric cars, you'd still have to go burn fossil fuels to get the electricity. And this is the nonsense from the left. Everything sounds good until you actually have to go through the process of creating.
Yeah.
And that's why I just wanted to make sure that people understand that there's no free lunch. I think Milton Friedman probably said that better than anybody. Another person I really admire. God rest his soul. There's no free lunch. Everything has a price. Everything has to be paid for and has to be covered. And I think when they look at these Green New Deal ideas, they also come from frankly, a place in their principles where they believe that you can just print money without any consequences. And at the core of it all, they truly believe that there's no limit to the amount of money they can print or they can create because there's no consequences to it. And that kind of ideology, that kind of thought process is just so destructive of our country.
Mhm. Perfect. Thank you.
All
Iris,
right.
you got more? I can keep going. I guess just if we could jump back to the part where you said, the left feels that they can, just print money for these things that they want to do. I mean, that kind of leads a little bit of a segue into the next relief package.
Right.
And, excuse me, so many people have said, well, we're just printing money, and then trillions and this, that, and the other thing. And we know the left is trying to bring in things for marijuana dispensaries and, so many different things that are not, or does not relate to the average American person who is trying to save their business or just put food on their table. And I think that's, kind of hitting everybody at every generational class. What are your thoughts on that? Are we just throwing money to bad, or is this something that you feel the GOP should steadfast on and bring Speaker Pelosi to the table with regard to her demands?
The first thing I would say is that, the fact that we're even here really is because government shut down the economy. I view I'm a conservative. I'm also somewhat libertarian. I have libertarian leanings. And the number one thing that has bothered me throughout all of COVID-19 is that you've had, through emergency power, a complete shutting down of the ability for people to, one, live their lives, and two, to earn money based upon the value of their labor. I think it's been very destructive. That being said, does government have a responsibility because of what they've done? I think so. And so I do think there has to be some continued relief. Now, what Nancy Pelosi wants, that's nonsense. She wants to bail out state governments that weren't managing their budgets over the last several years. Well, every time there's some crisis going on in the country, the left wants to bail out the states like Illinois and New York and New Jersey. So as far as I'm concerned, no. In the last bill that they had, or her version of the last bill, it called for the federal government taking a much larger role in voting practices. No, it's not their purview. That's what state governments do. And so I think that the Republicans in the House and the Senate should try to continue the negotiations. But if these negotiations are going to be based upon just sticking a bunch of other wish list items in that bill, the answer is no. And you take that to the American people and you say, listen, we are prepared to make sure that businesses have access to capital to continue their operations to the best of their ability, because, yeah, we have shut you down because of a pandemic situation. But what we're not going to do is just give out the liberal laundry list on all these other things because we're trying to negotiate something that is needed for people. And I think if we take that message out, I think people will understand that and then hold her accountable. Yeah. So that's my view on it, and yeah, frankly, my view of her.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, those are my questions, and I'm sure I can come up with thousands more. You're so interesting to listen to, so that's great.
Really,
appreciate your time.
And before we get cut off here, just one last question. I know that you did some mentoring back in the day with your church. If you could give any kind of advice to young people to just, how can I say this? Just to give them hope, or to give them like some kind of inspiration to keep going, to not think less of themselves because of the way that they look,
Get
ahead.
I got two pieces of advice to help them. The first is, I don't want to say this one. The first is, young people, everybody makes decisions in life. Some of them poor. I've made them. And so the only one thing I always try to communicate with young people is, if you mess up, you make up, but never give up. That's it.
I like that.
You have a real opportunity where people can get over the things that they've done wrong, but you just got to keep fighting, and you just got to keep working, and you got to be willing to take risks. You got to be willing to step out and do things
True.
that people don't think you can do, but you just have to have a real belief, a deep belief in yourself and what you're capable of. I would when I was giving a youth message one night, I said you have to have an irrational confidence in yourself.
Mm,
Because a lot of times the world will tell you you can't do it.
I like that.
The world will tell
That's
you
great.
you can't. Your friends will tell you you can't. Your family will tell you you can't, but in your
Oh
heart's heart,
yeah.
you believe you can. And so sometimes you have to have an irrational confidence in yourself that nobody else has. Now you got to temper that with some logic. I mean, you can't be out here just doing silliness. But that's the first thing. The second thing I would tell young people all the time is, you're growing up at a time, forget the United States. You're growing up at a time in the history of the world where you literally have every opportunity to succeed. I don't care what they say on TV. I don't care what the left tries to tell you about what America is or not, especially if you're a young Black kid. That is utter fool. It's nuts. I'm 41 years old, right? The opportunities I had in my life were some of the best in the history of the world. They were better than my mother's. They were better than my grandmother's. My kids, my oldest son is 17. I tell him this all the time. You are at a time in the history of the world where literally you could do whatever you want in life. Ignore knucklehead people who say that you can't, because that is a lie. You have everything within you to do it. You just have to go get it. Period.
Nice.
Keep going. I like that. I like that philosophy. I think that bodes well for women too. I mean, I'm 60, so I look back on times where, wearing a pantsuit to work wasn't allowed, and, minor things like that just takes the one step for the first person to do it. And before you know it, and you're right. Mentoring is important, and just irrational. What was it? Irrational. I want to write that down.
Irrational confidence.
Irrational confidence.
I
That
love
was a good
that. I
one.
love
I do too.
Well, outside of politics, I'm a huge basketball fan. Huge. I love basketball. I'm a Kobe guy. And so sometimes being a Republican, they're like, well, how do you like Kobe Bryant? I'm like, everybody needs to calm down for a second. This ain't nothing to do with politics. I'm a Kobe guy. God rest his soul. And for me, we're the same age. And watching him when he went into the NBA at 18, and being able to, become one of the best players in the history of the game, in spite of the setbacks, in spite of the things that happened in Eagle, Colorado. I know the story like everybody else, but he had a deep, unabiding, unwavering confidence in himself and in his abilities. And it didn't matter what was going on. He stayed locked in on that. So that's what, now it's Mamba mentality, but that's what it was. It's always been that way. And I just think that if more young people, and frankly, more people in general, had that kind of unwavering confidence in themselves, sometimes I call it an irrational one, but that kind of unwavering confidence in themselves and their ability, they would be surprised how far they would truly go.
Yeah. But I think the left does a good job in making them feel like they shouldn't have confidence, feeling like they're not worth anything. So that just drives me nuts.
The very people who say they claim to want to help and lift up, they do a disservice to, and that's a shame. It really is. And you're a great role model, like Kobe was to you. I mean, you're a great role model, I would think, for young Black men and women that want to get into politics and finance and, really move forward. I mean, for any young person,
I mean, look, last thing I'll leave you guys with, 'cause I know we've been on, and I like I said, I got 3 sons. So I always tell them, like, whether it's sports or whether it's school, I'm like, mostly it's a lot about sports, but I always tell them, like, you have to work hard. There's no way around it. Like, I don't care what you say. Like, when you're out there playing the game, I don't have to be at practice to know what you did and what you didn't do, because the game reveals all. And so you have to put in the work. There are no shortcuts. Nobody can do the work for you. You have to do it yourself. And as long as you do that, then you have no regrets. Then you go out there and you perform and you do what you need to do. And I tell them, I'm like, that's not basketball, that's life. I don't care what it is. It's whatever you want to put your hand to, you know, you have to put in the work. And as long as you put in the work and ignore what other people are doing and just stay focused, you'll be successful.
Perfect.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for meeting with
Byron,
us today.
I really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
You guys are welcome.